Hello. Mhm. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Glad to see you all. Glad to see people made it through the time change. And it's always an interesting time of year here in Hawaii, kind of the relationship to the continent. It's like, even though it's a time question, there's this like feeling more distant or less distant. And so uh, you start to feel a little less distant for a little while. Uh, and yeah, thanks for being flexible. I only just learned that folks in at least parts of Arizona also don't change time. So seems like you all are steady, which is good to hear. I know some reservations don't change also. So wherever you have or have not shifted in time or space, welcome. Mm. Michelle has landed in Chiang Mai. She's in Thailand right now. Just got to Steve's apartment last night. So they're visiting. She's well, he's well. So just for folks to know that she took her time kind of getting over there, to kind of pace her system. But she's over there. She'll be there for a few weeks. It was like really good, worth the effort. So they are sending their love, their aloha, uh, to all of us today. And it's actually, I mean, it's been I think 3 years since they've seen each other. I think anyone of us who were at Hollyhock that last time saw Steve more recently than Michelle has. So um, good to know they're able to visit. Mhm. So looking forward to sitting with you all, offering a little talk today, keeping our momentum going. So coming once again into your seated posture, letting your eyes come to close. And as always, we encourage a real sense of just being very gentle in this transition between what we think of as perhaps our sort of normal way of being into this physical and mental, emotional posture, trying not to be rigid with the mind, rigid with the body, even if we are determined and dedicated. You have to be careful about some of the unconscious baggage that we can carry along with that idea of being determined. Like it requires a hardening of the heart, hardening of the mind, when in fact, what we encounter in this attempt to be in closer relationship to reality as we're experiencing it directly requires more agility, more fluidity, nimbleness, dexterity of mind. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch, activity of the mind. It's all moving so quickly, mysteriously. It requires this kind of nimbleness, fluidity instead of rigidity, but that is still clear, that is still connected, that is still interested in what's actually happening instead of the overlay that we might have a preference for. And so when we bring the attention to the realm of sound, we notice them coming and going, streaming by, changing, not static, not fixed. And so if we truly want to understand sound, understand their nature, it requires a kind of accompanying each moment of sound with mindfulness, a mindfulness that's dedicated but able to adapt to the changes. Each new moment of sound, each subtle moment of change, of arising or of dissipating, requires a new moment of attention, a new moment of mindfulness for each moment of arising, of changing existence, of passing away. And so the mindfulness itself is not dull or heavy, leaden, deadened. It's energized, requires lightness, brightness, fluidity, but without tension, without straining or striving, which will simply slow it down. So bringing that same quality to bear on experiences in the body, similar but different than the sound vibrations, sensations of pressure and lightness, tension, release, hardness, softness, moisture, dryness, cohesion, distension. throbbing, stinging, the many different physical sensations. We can become aware of in the body, throughout the body. Also, call upon this similar quality of mindfulness that's agile, dexterous, fluid, energized. If it's to keep up with the changing quality of physicality, not trying to manipulate, control, fix, but simply accompany. Sensations in the whole body, or the hands are touching in contact, or in the area of the abdomen where the breath can be noticed through the gentle rising and falling of the belly. Not trying to get anything, achieve anything, create anything, control anything, accompanying the breath, the rising, rising, the falling, falling, and quality of tenderness, the recognizing the worthiness of each moment to be known, to be in relationship with, care for, to understand. And while we may maintain the general sense of a primary object, whether it's in the breath, the whole body, seated, or the stream of sound, we don't need to be perturbed when some other thing arises, a thought, imagination, worry, something else in the sense field. That quality of kind attention, mindfulness, tenderness, and accompany a thought, sound, and smell, an unpleasant or pleasant physical sensation. In this way, the continuity of accompaniment need not be broken, even if the object changes here and there, or we lose the thread. for a little while. Nothing need be outside of our ability to care for, to accompany with mindfulness. Keeping it simple and quiet, finding our way through this life moment by moment, in the good company of mind and body. Mm, good to sit with you all. It's such a it's such an unique way of being together. It is when we're in person, and actually sharing a physical space. How rare is it to be able to sit quietly in a group of people, in the dominant culture at least. And even online, there's just the sort of paradox, of course, of that on one hand, we're most of us alone in our physical space, or maybe there's another person or two, but that we're also together on this in this other way that's also real, you know. Mm. But that sense of how are we company to each other? How do we accompany one another? What are the different forms and flavors and qualities that can take, and how important that is, can be, should be for us. That's just been something I've been really reflecting on a lot these days. I think some of it is certainly inspired by the recent death of my mom. I, I think that there's, of course, something just to do with that. When we are really confronted with the fleetingness of life and of relationships, the uncertainty of, when the last time we might see someone is, how long it might be in between visits, and do we take that really seriously enough? Do we take it, do we take that really to heart and seriously, not only in the sense of with gravity and some of the heaviness of that, but also seriously, yes, maybe in the kind of affective sense, but just that we make the most of the time, that we really recognize the preciousness of each interaction, each coming together, each departing moment that we have with one another, with our own lives, and with, of course, just the sensory experience that we have, when we're trying to pay attention to what's happening in our bodies, minds, and the sense fields that we receive each moment. How do we honor that quality of accompaniment and accompanying each other, ourselves, uh, in ways that are familiar and maybe then less familiar? And I think that sometimes the being able to have some comfort or confidence in the meditation practice of being with one another in kind of different ways that bring out different qualities of presence and connection, that are not, don't shy away from some of the paradoxes, is also really important. Mm. One of the gifts of getting sick or being sick, or uh, accompanying someone who's unwell, if you're in the hospital a lot, mm, there there are ways that some of the relationships can be very meaningful, very important, very powerful, even kind of more, that even if they're perfunctory, I think they're I mean, I know it can go many different ways, especially if someone's in a lot of agony or very embittered about their position and situation. Sometimes, meanness or shortness or uh, hurtness. I mean, personality doesn't just disappear because we're in a hard position or because we're working in a hospital and have long, tiring days that we're not always compensated for, physically or materially or emotionally. But in my experience, not just for myself, but for my mom, for staff people, for friends that were visiting, there were a lot of moments, over the period of time where she was kind of increasingly unwell and kind of needing to go urgently to the hospital, more regularly. And that there was an opening for really beautiful connection as well. And so, yeah, some of that was with uh, staff, cleaning staff, and nursing staff, and doctor staff, and uh, all range of professionals that would come in and visit, and some were more sort of standard, as you might imagine, but a surprising amount ended up being more meaningful, and um, doctors included, even though they tended to be there for the shortest period. And had different sort of schedules. Sometimes they were really able to tune in to the gravity of a situation and the the emotional quality of a room, and of who was present. And you can imagine what it's like for them to go from room to room to room to room, with sort of different situations. But of course, a lot of it was sort of at strange hours of the night or morning where it was cleaning staff or techs, who could come in for kind of regular testing. But you get to know people, and there's something about that quietude and the irregularity of the situation um, that I think sometimes led to, yeah, kind of heart openings, more quiet, more connection beyond simply just agreement about views, political views or whatever. And then for my mom's friends and our family to be able to visit, there were sometimes it was sometimes my mom just wanted it to be more kind of light and normal and casual, and then sometimes it was quieter and more reflective. And there was one time in the last winter where we were in Boston, and a cousin was visiting, and she was a little younger than me, but had it was just she was able to come and hear stories about her dad who had passed away at this point. He passed away some years ago, and um, have time with my mom, that was like really different, things that she didn't know about her own dad or stories about her parents, going out dancing or whatever, things that, you get a little bit different stories sometimes from different people in your constellation. Mhm. And so we were telling her, talking about some of the old days and how our family had inherited this tradition from an Irish friend to hold a St. Patrick's Day party, a potluck party every spring. Because in the town I grew up in, there's a lot of Irish, um, and so there's a big St. Patrick's Day parade and a big St. Patrick's Day road race, and then on the day of the parade, we would start kind of hosted this potluck party after my parents' friends stopped doing it, and it was just this like really beautiful gathering that would happen every year of like they would just invite anyone in their work and their organizing and their friends, community, and sort of everyone was welcome. Um, Lots of kids running around, and the weather in like mid-March was usually not great, but it was, sometimes manageable to, go outside. And there were these sort of standard dishes, that my mom would make, and mm, people would bring. There were really good memories that we had, and that my cousin also had as a kid. He was quite young, during those times, but that they would come and have a lot of fun. And so the decided that night after my cousin left, I said, Mom, I think it was in, February, end of February. It was only a couple of weeks before St. Patrick's Day, but I said, Mom, I think we need to do this. I think we need to do the party again. And here we were. She was she was in rough shape. She was getting her chemo, and she was in rough shape. And we were going to the ER once a week, and we both looked at each other like, this is like such a crazy. So it could be like really one of the worst ideas I've ever had, or like the best idea. And so she she got it. She got it that it was a good idea, probably, maybe. And so we went forward with it, and then, the night before, she couldn't breathe. It was what kind of part of what started happening to her. And so we ended up zooming up to the emergency room. Mm, we were there for, I don't know, 6 or 8 hours. And then it was like 3:30 in the morning by the time we got back home. And the plan was to start getting up and cooking at 6:30 for people to, start getting there at 9. And it was definitely that feeling of like, I can't believe we're about to have. I mean, I was really, just like, should we just cancel? We're so cooked. We barely got home. And anyway, we decided to just do it. She got up and she made her cheese strata and her blueberry coffee cake. These sort of classic things that she would like to make for that particular potluck. And it ended up being totally amazing. It was a really very powerful, wonderful day. And friends had come from, way back, people we hadn't seen in many years, and uh, really celebrated her, in her life. And it was very clear why we were doing it. And um, we all sang to her, a song that she had learned from at the United Farm Workers Union when she worked with them for many years and organized with them for many years. So it was very beautiful. And such a reminder to me of how important that was for her. That she spent the last year of her life making this cookbook of family recipes, and not just sort of biological family, but kind of our family, and kind of telling her story about her relationships to food and community and organizing, and fun and joy and together, and how important that was for what also was her, community organizing work and political organizing work, and realizing that it had to be built upon relationships that were deeper than just shared views. And so uh, she had made this cookbook, and I partly why I bring it up is I had a gathering this morning that I made that same cheese strata for, um, from the cookbook. And it was kind of just reflecting on this very powerful ethic of hers, and I was wanted to speak to it on at her memorial service, which we had a couple weeks ago, and because there was something which I think I really like understood about her that felt very important, and it had to do with that she was, we can talk about like greedy types and deluded types and aversive types in our lineage, and there's a value to that, and a big value to understanding like our orientation of how are we trying to create stability for in our lives, and that we all have all three of these orientations, but some of us are a little bit more oriented towards creating stability through pleasurable experience and the accumulating of that and the reassertion of that. Other people ha create more of a sense of stability through aversion, keeping away the negative, getting rid of the unpleasant, or through delusion, which is sort of just not tuning in to the unpleasantness of things, is one way of sort of describing it. And so they're all reasonable, understandable mechanisms, that we have to try to create stability in a world and a physical and emotional system that's always changing, that's where everything is really unstable. And they all have their shadows, of course, because they're trying to create a sense of stability based on fabrication, based on something that is not ultimately going to be able to provide stability. Um, and so there's a perpetual dependency and kind of franticness that develops, and personality and behaviors that also have all these shadow sides, of course. Um, but the beautiful sides of them, I think, are also not always recognized or valued, and so this quality of hers of valuing joy and happiness and fun and pleasant experience was very strong. But part of what I think helped make it wholesome or on the balance of things was that she always wanted it to be shared. It was never, well, never, it was very rarely a sense of being satisfied with like her own sense of happiness or pleasure or joy. That the majority of her efforts towards it were wanted to be shared happiness, shared fun, shared adventure, shared excitement, shared enthusiasm, with friends, with family, with others, big or small groups. That was just like a very important. It was fundamental to her, and that is, I think, a very. I was trying to figure out if there's a word for that. Like, is there a name that we have in English for the sense of shared joy, shared gladness, uh, collective happiness or celebration? And I couldn't think of any. I really tried. I tried the thesaurus, um, and I decided to write my friend. I have a friend whose name is Adrienne Marie Brown. She's um, old comrade who has gotten kind of well known for a bunch of her organizing work and kind of uh, visionary perspective on a lot of things. She wrote a book called Pleasure Activism about how kind of social change work really should be rooted in joy. And so I was like, Adrian's going to know this word. There must be a word. So I wrote her. She also didn't know, but we both agreed that we had heard words in other languages. And we didn't know necessarily all of what they meant. There's UI in Japanese, Freud in German, Ubuntu, which we both had some, understanding of, and Gunibantu, a word in Dutch called Gezelligheid. I totally, I'm sure, obviously I said that terribly. Communitas in Latin. Um, but anyway, we couldn't find it, so we played around and Here are a few words that I think are cool. Co-merriment, co-mirth, inter-joy, inter-revelry, or I like this one, communa mudita, right? Because that sense of like in the Buddhist world, like mudita of like shared joy, or joy in the happiness of others, um, but that it's like a shared experience in our kind of collective happiness, uh, communa mudita. Um, anyway, she wrote this. She says, co-merriment feels like collective holiday joy. Co-mirth for that shared, uncontrollable laughter. And the bonus shared of meeting eyes when you can't talk about it yet. Inter-revelry, those collective moments when the joy and playfulness between us is almost as visible as a constellation. Interjoy feels deeper, like liberation, transformation. There's a wholeness in the threads of connection. It's not always that we necessarily uh, need new words to describe something, but I think it's still a valuable process. I'm looking here. Someone wrote conviviality. Jackie, yes. Though you can be convivial as like an individual too, right? Does it? I'm gonna look it up. As like someone has a convivial attitude. Anyway, I think that's good. We'll add it to the collection. um, Sense of like something the feeling of, and that there's different ways of experiencing it. There's different flavors that might kind of like take uh take shape in different ways. And that sense of like that's something you almost can see as a constellation. The other day, so some of you know, like one of the I've been sort of like working, reflecting on this notion of dialectics and this understanding, this perspective on things, whether it's the universe, the social world, nature, or ourselves, of this sort of interplay of uh, opposing forces, right? Or a progression through uh, tension and dynamic kind of interwovenness and the structure of growth that can get created through um, a natural and inherent kind of conflictual energy in ourselves or in the universe. And it sort of comes from two angles. One of like kind of the sort of social theory and looking at kind of Marx and Western philosophical traditions, which it turns out like Marx get this idea from Hegel. Hegel gets the idea from these Christian mystics, and these Christian mystics get it from these Egyptian a time when it's sort of like um, the Hermetica, like the sort of like kind of Greek Egyptian uh, confluence of perspectives and stuff happening, thousands of years ago. And it brings me to this like sense of course, that like actually many traditions, philosophical worldviews have some aspect of this tension of opposites as like a dynamic aspect of things and how they grow, and that there are differences among how they're interpreted in Taoism or in indigenous perspectives in the Andes, but that there's something very powerful. And I'm always hesitant to use the word universal, but very broadly shared, um, if also broadly interpreted differently. Anyway, it's all just to say that one of the things that I've been exploring about this and finding my way to kind of deepening is through the creation of cordage. Uh, any ancient people, 100%, and and many of these traditions persist, is understanding that the way that you build rope, right, which is essential for a gazillion things, is the initial kind of process of that is you're twisting, you're wrapping fibers around each other, but you're twisting them in opposite directions. And so it's the tendency to push against each other that's creating the structure of growth, that's creating this thing. And so that there's it's all just to say that there is a very powerful understanding of something that has to be intuited in order to create cordage, which is something that all people have done at some point in any lineage, any past. And that there's something very profound about it and amazing that through this kind of twisting, you create something stronger and solid and useful, and doesn't require any special tools or ultimately special skill, though it's hard to make good cordage, it turns out. And so I had a dream a few weeks ago where someone told me to read Cat's Cradle, which I had never read, the Kurt Vonnegut book. And I read it, and they're mildly interesting. It was interesting. There were some interesting things about it, but the most interesting thing for me that has come out of it, which he talks about some in the book, is actually the game Cat's Cradle, which is like a string game. And I don't know how many of you have played it. This is like a well, longer, interesting kind of conversation at some point. I learned it from my grandmother as a kid, and there's like I'm not gonna, for folks who don't know, I'm not going to do them now, but you kind of do this like, this is actually not the first one you start, but you have like a bunch of strings, and then you play between two people, and you create kind of different formations between the strings. That is sort of like one whole lineage of string games. Seems to have started in Asia forever ago. And then there's other lineages that are more kind of played individually, a lot in the Pacific. So I've learned that this is like a huge, amazing thing about humanity, is that people play string games. And some of them play kind of between people. And then you look at Hawaii, you look throughout Polynesia, like Australia, Torres Straits, there's like incredible amount of figures that people learned how to make through strings and through kind of these entanglements and rearrangement of strings on the hands and on the fingers. So it's like super fun and super fascinating. And I've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole in it, which is all just to say, when I brought Michelle over to Honolulu the other day to get her on her plane to go to Thailand. We were at dinner, and I was trying to figure this certain form out, at dinner. And the waitress came over, and she was like, "What is that?" And I told her the basics, and she was like, "I used to do that. She's like, also her grandmother taught her, right?" And it was like sort of like this, like coming back to like, oh, and I remember this one you use your pinkies. And I was like, right. So then I was like, okay, before we go, we'll play. We'll see how far we can get in this sort of like standard game. So we did, we tried. We got through in that sort of standard version. There's about like 7 different forms you can make, and we made it through like 4. And then neither of us could remember how to do sort of like the next one. But then the guy at the table next to us, he called her over. He was like, "What are you guys doing?" And it was like this thing. I was like, "Oh," and so here is a waitress who I don't know, I won't see again, but it was like this moment of like play, right? That I had this like tangle of strings in my hand, and she was like, entangling her strings, and we had this very beautiful, fun, like joyous moment of something that was this sort of like feeling of like a heritage that we had lost. It was vague, but that was recoverable for sure. And then this sort of sense of like, actually, you can imagine that more and more people had some similar kind of notion of it, and that there are people now, of course. I mean, some people have never lost it and play all the time, and some, it is a way some organizations here are using it as a way to um, teach and tell stories. Because in some of the Hawaiian ones, for example, there are series of images that are created, and they're part of a story, that is old and ancient, and um, is intended to convey whatever it is intended to convey. We are living in such hard times, and there's very few of anyone who I hear or talk to where there's like, oh, there's a very clear path towards like a good outcome on its way for us in a shared way, um, true or not, and I think that of course we don't know, none of us know what's going to happen, but it is, the bleakness is striking, and the lack of sense of hopefulness is very powerful. And that sense of how do we continue to look for ways forward, continue to hold that possibility that there are, while not also losing that which we want is like essential to what we're trying to create, in the world we actually want to live in. And there is something about this idea of shared joy, inter-revelry, conviviality, comuna mudita, that feels really vital, actually. That feels um, fundamental. Uh, maybe as a way forward, maybe as something that actually provides answers and provides solutions and provides uh, kind of concrete things, but also something that provides, I guess, what's more what you would call culture, it's like it's a culture of, it's resilient to, they're not in denial of the bleakness and of the overwhelm, but that still remembers to prioritize happiness and um, gladness, between us. It's certainly a part of what I'm already enjoying about our bowl carving class again, that we're, meeting on Mondays. And, there is, of course, the part of it on one hand, ostensibly about like actually wood carving that we're doing to create these things. But um, the material is less important than the process, and that sense of shared space and shared experience of learning and of um, exploration, and of people taking pride in what they're doing, or people being honest about their challenges and how hard, what they're encountering, but to do it in a in a shared way, in a collective space. It's very beautiful. Um, and I think this thing with the string games and it's like, oh, it could be anything. It doesn't have, it's like I don't know, anything, but I see why people go into like clowning. There's like the Zen peacemaker people, I think, Bernie Glassman went to go just train as a clown. I don't know. I don't know how much that got sort of followed up, V Gravy and those guys. But it's like this sense of like doing something like playful, and that kind of breaks out a little bit of the sort of normal depressing routine of everything and the way we're sort of used to, interacting. There's a beautiful quotation I just read from George Jackson. He said, Black Panther revolutionary. Our task then is to search for a way to love and appreciate each other and life within the matrix of war. We have no choice. History has played an exceedingly cruel trick on us. It's calling for our best, and we can only try, must try, or they will kill the thing we love. The world must revolve, change, move. It must not be held back for any man's privilege, or it will die. Revolution is the imperative permanent renewing. Our task then is to search for a way to love and appreciate each other and life within the matrix of war. We have no choice. And this question then again of like, it doesn't have to always be tricks or, you know, new skills. I read I was reading this book by, it's not really by Carl Jung. He writes one chapter, Man and His Symbols. But I read his chapter amongst others, and it's hard. It's written there. He's like doing such incredible, innovative, amazing work, and of course, still written in a language that's a little bit frustrating and offensive and difficult sometimes. Um, but there's a part of he's trying to explain like what it means to live symbolically and humans, relationship to symbols and how much of sort of uh, modern society has moved away from either understanding it or even an intuitive sense. And so he has a little place where he describes visiting, and I didn't have time to find it, a tribe somewhere in Africa, and I can't remember where, my apologies, remote, and still living in very old ways. And he describes how in the morning that people would like blow into their hands and put their palms to the sun. And he said he asked them why they do it. And he said something to the effect of that, they don't know why they do it. They just do it. And of course, so he believes this. Jung believes they don't know why they're doing it, which is like, whatever. It's like whatever they told him about why they're doing it or decided not to tell him why they're doing it. If there's this guy, Edward Glissant, has a great notion of what's called opacity, where it's like the one thing kind of colonized people have as a tool is like keeping some level of like opacity from like the colonizers, of like you don't actually get to see what's inside here. So whatever was going on in the interaction, this notion, like, of course we do that. You know what I mean? Like, you don't you don't have to know why or figure it out, or I mean, of course, it's like we're living in a different era from Jung and from, who the question as to why when the sun rises would you like honor it, it's so ridiculous. It's like of course you would, of course we do. When the sun sets, it's like if you were in a place to see the sunset, it's like, well, of course people stop and watch the sunset. This like, it's the sun. And it's amazing that it arrives. It comes up every day. And it's amazing that it goes down. It's amazing we have the darkness, and it's amazing we have the days. And like, there has to be something in the way that we're living as spiritual people that recognizes that we're accompanying the sun in its journey, and the sun is accompanying us. And whether it's rising or setting or in between, right, which is always the place we have the hardest of like honoring and recognizing, like the majority of people's lives we kind of don't pay that much attention to. When they're being born, when they're dying, there's like this it comes into focus, the importance of accompaniment, of connecting, of sharing this goodness, of bringing joy, whether it's intense or just soft recognition. um, that it's like we have no choice. That sense of like we have no choice. You you have to honor every little thing, and that is the direction that the mindfulness practice goes in, that Vipassana goes in. It's not just a sort of immediate dismissal of all things because they're empty or because they're impermanent. It's like this accompanying each moment of connection, of the birth, life, and death of a sound, of an emotion, of course, of the people we encounter, and this sense of like when you're with someone for 5 minutes, when you're on the phone with them or you connect with them, is there some sense of like you're accompanying someone through this little window, this 5 minutes, this 2 minutes, this just wave, this recognition? There's this moment of connection, and then you're honoring it, you're maintaining it, and you're keeping there as it dissipates. And that you have to go through that full arc of experience of birth, life, and death with every single being you meet, every person, every animal being, every encounter you have is an opportunity to practice this accompanying, right? Um, do we relate to the world like that? How do we honor that sense of shifting that needs to happen? You know, it doesn't necessarily mean we're playing games with every single person we meet, and uh, you know, but though it could, I mean, it's like a way of life, it's a way of being, where you really change the dynamic in terms of how you're interacting with people, but even with ourselves, like when we're on retreat and it's so quiet, and the rainstorm comes, and you really feel like you can be accompanying each raindrop with that clarity and that kindness and that soft, beautiful connection of the heart. That nothing need be outside of this sense of accompaniment. Of course, to the point where it doesn't have to be subject and object. That there is a sense of the sharedness goes beyond identity, individual identity, and that it doesn't always mean that it's just always it, it passive, or that there isn't room for conflict or for things that are more dynamic and more challenging, that, but it's the willingness of like how, if we do get into conflict, if there is disagreement, if there is tension, are we doing it with that same level of commitment, right? To see it through to the end, to really work through something, And again, it doesn't mean that we maintain all relationships forever or that there aren't limits to what we can bear in terms of a connection with people in our lives or people we encounter. It doesn't mean that we're never against either, right? Again, part of the sort of like the dynamism of uh, that sort of dialectical aspect of things is very important, you know. It's like not Lennon said an interesting thing of like there the desire for unity is really often just the desire for stability. And I think that that's something really powerful in our practice of wanting to control, wanting it to be pleasant, wanting to be nice, or wanting to just ignore or dismiss or whatever the mechanism is. It's to kind of create a sense of stability in oneness, or in a kind of unified field of experience. But really to remember that's also not what the Buddha called for. It's like it has to be, it's alive. Things are always changing. There isn't the stability comes through the wisdom and the interpretation, and that only comes through the relationship of being with the unstable and the dynamism of it, and being in correspondence with the conflictual and with the tension, and that requires relationship. And it doesn't mean that we're in relationship with all things at all costs at all time, but that we see that there is a value in where we're cultivating the ability to be with something in its dynamism, in its changeability, and whether that's an internal thing, whether that's an external thing, for the sake of creating goodness, right? For the sake of something good, for the sake of something, um, for building something better. And that does matter, right? That it's not just that we are in this, it's not for no reason. It is cultivating patience. It is cultivating strength of heart. It is cultivating concentration. It's cultivating equanimity. It's cultivating kindness, mudita, compassion, of course, equanimity. So we just try to accompany ourselves, each sense door, accompany the beings we encounter, accompany the sun, the trees, the birds, the tables and chairs, whatever it is, the sense of like, is that connection we're building, creating something, aiming towards something beautiful, towards something good, towards understanding, towards kindness. And that life is just so fleeting. It's so fleeting. Whatever, life is fleeting and our impact is fleeting. It's just like it all just keeps moving on. And our life is real and our impact is real. And yet none of us have that much time. And it doesn't have to it can't amount to something stable, right? It's like each moment is new, each moment is changing, each moment is unfixed. Yet we do have this growing capacity to be with it with more and more wisdom, more and more non-attachment, more and more kindness, more and more clarity. That does give us a sense and a capacity to act outside of inevitability. And that has to be the only hope there is. That the future is not inevitable, it is not determined, that each of us are individually responsible for our actions, and that the greater that collective quality is understood and appreciated and valued, the more impact there will be. And yet our tools and our material is very humble. And we just, as George Jackson said, we try the best we can, you know. So thank you all. Yeah, thanks for listening, being there today, sharing our time and space together. And take care of yourselves, each other, whoever you encounter along the way. And see you next Sunday. All right. Aloha.